Marathon closing arguments today in the Diddy trial. Hi, I'm Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and it's time for another Daily Diddy, bringing you daily updates from the P. Diddy trial until we get a verdict. So, on the road today, but wanted to make sure to hit you guys back with more updates. So first off, I'm going to start with a correction, because I'm woman enough to admit when I'm wrong. So yesterday I said that the prosecution had decided to move away from using arson and kidnapping as the predicate offenses for racketeering. And I was like, that's a mistake, right? Well, turns out it was flawed reporting. So the source I was reading it from had originally reported it as arson and kidnapping is going to be removed when it was actually the attempt. So they had kidnapping and arson as the predicate offenses, but they also threw in attempted arson and attempted kidnapping, which is kind of confusing. So they took that out, which makes sense now. So they've now basically streamlined things for the jury, so there's less things for them to get hung up on, which is super important. As a former prosecutor, I can tell you, having a clean charging document and a clean set of jury instructions that are very straightforward makes it more likely to get a conviction. So there's that. So anyway, prosecution did their closing arguments today. They went 4 hours and 49 minutes. 4 hours and 49 minutes. For context, again, former prosecutor, my longest closing argument was like an hour. So this is a long time. And they did take breaks. So the judge did break for lunch, and then they took a break around the 4 hour mark. She was supposed to be done in 4 hours, but she needed a little bit more time, so she kept going. Now, the common themes that she basically talked about were things that we heard throughout the entire trial. That Diddy basically had a kingdom, the entire Bad Boy Enterprises, everything was his kingdom, and everyone was there to serve him. They talked about how Cassie and Jane were both basically puppets and that he controlled them. He had full control over every aspect of their lives. If they didn't comply, he used force. He would sometimes use nice things and gifts to kind of get them to comply. But if that doesn't work, carrot, stick, right? So there was that. Now, wanted to note something very interesting that I probably would have thrown into the closing argument if I could. So after Jane was done on cross-examination, now y'all remember the attorney, Tenny Garagos, was the one who did the cross-examination and tore her up one side and down the other. After cross-examination was over, Jane went over and hugged her. So to me, if that doesn't speak of somebody who's used to abuse, nothing else does. And I probably would have highlighted that as an example of how she was so, controlled and stuff like that, that she only responded to being hurt. And for those who are like, well, why didn't, especially Cassie, why didn't she try to leave? Well, every time she tried to leave, there was a Diddy security guard that dragged her back, and she ended up getting beaten again. Or her mom gets a phone call like, hey, I'm going to release a sex tape with your daughter if y'all don't give me money. And next thing you know, she had to pony up $20,000 or whatever it was. So, she really, so the prosecution really talked about all of those themes, as well as, talking about the sex workers and the crossing state lines and flying all over the country, which is transportation for the purposes of prostitution. Again, talking about the sex trafficking. And then also talked about the forced labor aspect as one of the predicates for RICO racketeering when talking about Mia, who was afraid to do anything. She was sexually assaulted by Diddy, and was hit, and she also saw the violence that happened to Cassie. So I would say, based on, again, remember, there's no cameras in the courtroom. We're basically reading transcripts and notes from what comes out of court. But it seemed that the prosecution lip-synced for their lives, as I kept saying, because, again, this all comes down to closing arguments. And, while 5 hours was a long time, there was a lot to cover, and she had to make sure that the jury understood, each and every aspect and how each element of each charge was proven from her perspective. So there's that. So she finished up. The judge was like, okay, it's 5 p.m. Y'all go home, which was probably a good idea. And so tomorrow we're going to have the defense closing arguments. And then likely after that would be the judge giving the jury instructions, where he reads the law, he reads the elements of the crimes that they have to look at, gives them some guidance on how to deliberate and what they need to do. And then they will begin deliberations. It's a Friday, so I don't know how much of that's going to happen. We're probably going to see more action on Monday. See you later. Bye.